everybody. This week is a tough one if you are black and living in America. If you're black anyway, but living in the USA at a time where you're pretty much told that the life of a black woman essentially doesn't matter, must be really rough. Breonna Taylor was a woman who was shot in her house while she was sleeping by police officers in Kentucky. It was earlier this week that the charges were read out against the officers who killed her. In a nutshell, the officer who fired the shots is not being held responsible for the death of Breonna Taylor. Brett Hankison has been charged not with Breonna's death, but with wanton endangerment for firing into a neighbour's apartment. 2 other officers who were involved have not been charged. It is a macabre coincidence that it was this week as well, but in 1955, that another decision was made. This time not by an all-white police unit, but by the American justice system and an all-white jury, in the case of the murder of Emmett Till. His death was one that shocked and horrified people in the US and worldwide. He became the face of the civil rights movement when his mother decided to have an open coffin at his funeral after he was beaten to death by racists in Mississippi. Today, while acknowledging and respecting the life of Breonna Taylor, I want to tell you the story of the murder of Emmett Till, because even though it was 65 years ago, clearly the change that needs to happen to not only protect the lives of black people, but to hold those that harm us accountable is yet to happen. With that, I welcome you to the anniversary. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. Whilst the case against the men who murdered Emmett Till was decided in about an hour by an all-white jury in an extremely racist part of America on the 28th of September 1955, so 65 years ago this week, we're actually going to start this story in August of the same year with Emmett, a name that we all know and a story that in the detail is just heartbreaking. He was a 14-year-old boy who was on summer vacation from Chicago. He was visiting his family in Mississippi, and Mississippi was in the Jim Crow era. Jim Crow laws were laws that enforced segregation in the South. These laws were enacted in the late 19th century and early 20th, and it was the legal principle of separate but equal. Racial segregation was extended to the public facilities and transportation, including coaches, trains, buses, and of course we know that facilities for African Americans was consistently inferior to the white counterparts. It was underfunded, and sometimes there was no facilities for the black community at all. I've included the link to the wiki on the Jim Crow era, so it has all the information on that for you. It was here in Mississippi that a young Emmett Till arrived on August 21st, 1955. After being in town with his family for a few days, Emmett and his cousin and a few friends decided to skip church. They went to the Bryant grocery and meat market in a place called Money. The actual events that took place are still to this day not clarified. Everyone had a different story, but this is the story that got told in court. Carolyn Bryant was 21, she was white, and she worked in the shop that was owned by her husband Roy. She was there alone with Emmett for a few minutes. His cousins and friends had made their purchases and they were milling about. Carolyn Bryant later in court told this story. Till asked for some candy inside a candy counter. When she placed the candy on top of the counter, he grabbed her right hand tightly and asked, "How about our date, baby?" He then apparently, according to her testimony, grabbed her by the waist near the cash register and told her, "You needn't be afraid of me, baby. I've slept with white women before." This all happened in the under a minute that Emmett was in the shop alone with Carolyn Bryant. There is, however, general agreement as to what happened outside of Bryant grocery and meat. Carolyn left the store, headed towards her car to retrieve, as she testified, a gun. Emmett whistled at her, and his cousin described it as a wolf whistle, that it was loud, like a wheel. And his cousins, who lived in Mississippi at the time, knew that Emmett had broken a long-standing taboo relating to social conduct between black people and white people. They knew they were in grave danger, so they ran quickly to their car and they sped out of town. Carolyn was working alone in the store because her husband Roy was off hauling shrimp for the week. When he returned a few days later, the town of Money was on fire with gossip over what had occurred. At the time, the only information they had was that it was a black teenager visiting from Chicago. The plan to kidnap whoever it was set. They wanted to teach him a lesson, which is what Roy Bryant said in court a little bit later. He got his half-brother, John Millam. He was ready to help. On the evening of the 27th of August, Roy Bryant and John Millam, along with Carolyn and a black man who went by the name of Johnny Washington, who was forced to go along with them, set off in a pickup looking for their target. It wasn't until about 2:30 that night that the gang turned up at the house that Emmett Till was staying. Somehow they learnt the address, and somehow they learnt the identity of the boy in question. They knocked on the door and demanded to see the fat boy from Chicago. Emmett Till's uncle went by the name of Moses Wright, and him and his wife were warned that they would be killed if they told anybody that the gang had come by. They went through the house, checking all of the occupied beds until they found Emmett Till. They ushered him out of the house, where Carolyn was heard saying that they had found the right boy, and Emmett Till was never seen alive again. They beat him, they dragged him to the bank of the Tallahatchie River, they shot him in the head, they tied him with barbed wire to a large metal fan, and they shoved his mutilated body in the water. Moses Wright, Emmett's uncle, reported his disappearance to the local authorities, and 3 days later his corpse was pulled out of the river. He was found by a couple of boys that were fishing, and his face was mutilated beyond recognition. They only managed to positively identify him because of the ring that he was wearing on his finger, which was engraved with his father's initials. Emmett Till's body was shipped to Chicago, where his mother opted to have an open casket funeral, a decision that shocked the world. His body was on display for 5 days, and thousands of people came to the Roberts Temple Church of God to see the evidence of this brutal hate crime. Emmett's mother said that despite the enormous pain it caused her to see her son's dead body on display, she opted for an open casket funeral in an effort to let the world see what had happened. In the weeks that passed between Emmett Till's funeral and the trial of Roy Bryant and John Millam, 2 black publications, Jet Magazine and the Chicago Defender, published the graphic photos of Emmett Till's corpse. I wasn't sure if I should post them in this video because they are very graphic, although I think that most people have seen the pictures before. So if you don't want to see them, skip ahead 5 seconds and they won't be there. But I'm going to post the photos now. The trial against Emmett Till's killers began on September 19th, 1955. Because black people and women were barred from serving jury duty, Roy Bryant and John Millam were tried before an all-white, all-male jury in a racist southern state. Moses Wright took to the stand and he identified the 2 as Emmett's kidnappers and killers. At the time, it was almost unheard of for black people to openly accuse white people in court. And despite the overwhelming evidence of their guilt, despite wide pleas for justice from outside of Mississippi, despite multiple witnesses seeing them looking for the boy, hearing the shots, hearing the beatings, hearing the exchanges and hearing even the confessions, because they weren't quiet about what they did. On September the 23rd, 1955, 65 years ago this week, the panel of white male jurors acquitted Roy Bryant and John Millam of all charges. The deliberations lasted 67 minutes. In January of 1956, the year after, Roy Bryant and John Millam admitted to committing the murder. They were protected by the double jeopardy laws and they told the whole story to Look magazine for $4,000. John Millam died in 1980. Roy Bryant died in 1994. And to this day, no one has ever been found legally responsible of the death of Emmett Till. He died in the most horrific of ways at 14 years old at the hands of racist white men with a gun and a grudge. In 2007, in an interview, Emmett Till's accuser, Carolyn Bryant, admitted that she had lied about Emmett making advances towards her. In the summer of 2018, the Justice Department reportedly reopened the investigation into Emmett Till's death with the discovery of new information. This week, 65 years ago, a jury of all white men found the murderers of Emmett Till not guilty. And this week in 2020, the police who killed Breonna Taylor were not charged with her death. The question I want to ask you is, has there been enough change in the last 65 years? Are black bodies protected? Drop a comment, use the research links that I always post in the description box, and I will catch you next week. Thank you for watching the anniversary.